I just got the all clear. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alberto Villafan. I'm the digital producer over at Sahan Journal, and we have two wonderful guests for a lovely conversation today. We're going to be discussing changes to temporary protected status and humanitarian parole impacting Afghans and Venezuelans in Minnesota. I'm joined by two fantastic guests. They'll help us gain clarity during this chaotic time. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Nasreen, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Nasreen Sajadi. I'm the executive director at the Afghan Cultural Society.
Thank you so much, and we're very happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Anna?
Hi, happy to be here. My name is Anna Patratz Acosta, and I am a professor of law specializing in immigration law at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions for our guests today regarding temporary protected status, make sure to drop those into the chat. Please send them into the chat. We'll be sharing these with our panelists during our hour-long conversation today. Since January, a barrage of presidential orders and a stream of court decisions have created confusion in the U.S. immigration system. This month, the Trump administration terminated temporary protected status, otherwise known as TPS, for Afghans. He terminated those same protections in January for Venezuelans. Anna, I think a lot of people may hear these acronyms like TPS and not really know what they are or even how they work. Can you tell us what exactly temporary protected status TPS is?
Sure. So, in brief, temporary protected status is a form of status that was authorized by Congress in 1990 through the Immigration Act of 1990. And with TPS authority, it was previously under the INS. Now the authority lies with the Secretary of Homeland Security. It allows the executive branch to grant temporary status and work permits to nationals of certain countries where the country is suffering from either a natural disaster or civil strife. So in the case of both Afghanistan and Venezuela, TPS was granted on account of the country undergoing civil strife or war. In Afghanistan, of course, we had the fall of the government and rise of the Taliban taking over with the withdrawal of U.S. troops in this fall of 2021, which led to grant of TPS by President Biden initially in 2021, and then a redesignation in 2023. And then in the case of Venezuelans, President Trump, one of the last acts that he did prior to leaving office in 2021, was granting a different status called DED, or Deferred Enforced Departure, to Venezuelans. And then later in March of 2021, President Biden designated Venezuela for TPS and then redesignated Venezuela for TPS in September or October of 2023. And Venezuela, of course, has been living under a dictatorship since the early, I think 1999 or 2000, initially under Hugo Chavez and now under the Maduro regime. And it was granted in recognition of the civil strife occurring in Venezuela.
So, Nasreen, over to you. What are the conditions that forced Afghans to leave Afghanistan?
There's a lot of reasons people leave Afghanistan. I think that the evacuation was so scary for people in 2021, and they were just getting phone calls to leave. And so I think that the way that the evacuation went put even more fear in people to get out as fast as they could, because they were in fear that something was about to happen to them. Many people have had to leave because they were trying to build a different type of society that the Taliban was not approve of, which included more freedom for movement, freedom for a lot of the minority groups that are oppressed in this country. And a lot of people had to leave because they supported the U.S. military and fought against the Taliban. And so many people that we talk with have had entire family killed by Taliban. And so if they go back, they'll likely be killed.
I remember seeing some of those images when people were first fleeing. There were photos of people boarding helicopters and in any form of transit. It must have been terrifying.
Yeah, when people talk about the way they were evacuated and the time they spent at the camps, you can see in their bodies the way they get tense and the fear that they had from that experience alone. It was very traumatic for many folks.
So the president of the United States has said like it's safe to return now. But what are you hearing from members of our local community? You know, what are they saying about the conditions in Afghanistan?
It's not safe to return. And they can't even return because they can't even travel
What do
to
you
even
mean
go
they
home.
can't even return?
Like if they were to get a green card or approval to travel, their attorneys are telling them not to leave the US in case the Muslim ban or the travel ban comes back into effect, that they'll be trapped somewhere.
So essentially, that they're being warned that there is a chance that they could be stuck in like limbo.
Yeah.
So, what do they do in this situation? Where do they go?
They stay here. They stay stuck here. There's people who want to reunite with their family members. They want to get married. They want to see their kids. They want to see their parents, and they can't. They can't leave.
So, with the changes to TPS, then what do Afghans in Minnesota tell you they're experiencing right now?
There's a lot of fear of what all of this means. Like with I think the fear especially comes with the idea that the US is claiming it's safe when and that the economy has gotten better when more than 23 million people were on aid last year to stay alive. So I don't know how they were able to magically fix the economy to make sure 23 million people aren't starving to death all of a sudden, but the situation has not gotten better. Talking with women on the ground that live in Afghanistan, it's very scary. And the violence trickles down. It goes from Taliban down. And so then the family cultures start to change too and become more restrictive because they're afraid. And they, like when men speak up even about things, they get beaten. And so it's very oppressive place.
Anna, I guess, can you draw any parallels to what Venezuelan immigrants are experiencing in the United States right now?
Yes. So a lot of the similar things that I'm hearing from my Venezuelan clients that, well, and then just to provide a little bit of context behind the political situation in Venezuela, they actually underwent a presidential election in July of 2024. And the results of the election, where Maduro was declared the victor, have been highly contested. Leading up to the election, there was a lot of political strife where the leading opposition candidate was banned from running for president. So after the Maduro was declared the victor in the election in 2024, the situation in Venezuela, if anything, has gotten worse since the last designation of TPS in September of 2023. And a lot of Venezuelans are saying that if they were forced to return, because many Venezuelans who have come to the United States were politically active or political dissidents opposed to the Maduro regime, very similarly, they fear that they would be arrested immediately upon their arrival. And many of them, prior to leaving Venezuela, have experienced political persecution. They've been arrested. They've been beaten by officials for participating in opposition activities. And one other piece of context, just kind of legally, about the TPS program and sort of what's required of the Department of Homeland Security when they terminate TPS, there actually is a requirement that the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the Department of State and other relevant agencies, that they conduct an assessment of conditions on the ground to evaluate whether or not it is actually safe or that the situation has improved sufficiently for people to return. And I think in both the case of Afghanistan and Venezuela, it sort of defies credulity to say that the situation on the ground has improved sufficiently so that it is now safe for people to return. And that's one of the things that was raised in the lawsuits challenging the termination of TPS in both Venezuela and Afghanistan.
So what you're telling me is generally speaking, there isn't like an actual metric to determine if a country is safe to return. It's just a matter of like, well, I said so. So
Yes and no, but they can't just declare that it's safe. It has to be supported by an evaluation of conditions on the ground. So if you're saying, yes, it's safe, but then you have a report where this evaluation has been conducted and all of the facts in your report contradict that declaration, that's also something that would be grounds for a legal challenge to the termination.
Thank you to everyone joining us just now. If you are just joining us now, we are here with Ana Patratz Acosta, a Mitchell Hamlin School of Law professor, and Nasreen. Can you say your last name for me one more time?
Sajadi.
Nasreen Sajadi. Thank you very much. Executive Director of the Afghan Cultural Society. We are discussing changes to temporary protected status, otherwise known as TPS, impacting Afghans and Venezuelans in Minnesota. If you want to learn more about this, you can read our recent stories on sahanjournal.com, or you can continue listening to this. I was going to say delightful. This isn't a delightful conversation. Bad choice of words there. That's my bad.
Say the company is delightful,
The company.
but
The topic is heavy.
It's
horrific.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for joining us just now. Anna, we read a lot about immigration cases going to the court system. You know, in the meanwhile, what are Venezuelans who've lost TPS status actually doing to manage their lives in Minnesota?
Sure. So in terms of like their legal status, and this is something that is true for people of all nationalities that have fled horrific conditions, including nationals of Afghanistan as well. So really what lawyers are doing is sort of evaluating the situation that their clients are facing to evaluate whether or not there are alternative forms of relief. So for many individuals in Minnesota and around the country who are nationals of Venezuela who held TPS status, often they are also eligible for other forms of relief, particularly asylum. So just very 10,000-foot level, you can be granted asylum, and this is a standard that was set by the Refugee Convention from 1951, an international treaty, where if you can prove that you are likely to be persecuted or have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of one of 5 grounds, your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, you are entitled to protection under the law and being granted asylum status. So because many people who fled Venezuela were political dissidents or did belong to an opposition party or had family members who belonged to an opposition party, that would be grounds for asylum. Similarly, for Afghanistan, if somebody assisted the U.S. military, or if you were a woman who supported equal rights for women in Afghanistan, or a number of other grounds, you also could have a colorable asylum claim and could pursue asylum as an alternative form of relief if your temporary protected status is revoked.
I have one more question for you, Anna, and then we're going to move over to Nasreen. Many community members from Venezuela and Afghanistan have told Sahan reporters that they're fearful that deportations might be the next step. Something is coming. Could this genuinely happen? If they're on a protected status.
Yes, absolutely. And what we're actually seeing around the country is that a lot of times with somebody's immigration case, there are many moving parts happening. So for Venezuelan nationals in particular, many of them were admitted or paroled into the country at the southern border, and they have a pending case before immigration court. And what we've seen recently is that when people appear for their immigration case, the government will move to terminate proceedings or close out their immigration case. And then if they had a pending asylum application before the immigration court, because of a jurisdictional issue, if your case is closed, you then need to refile your asylum case with USCIS, a sub-agency that's part of the Department of Homeland Security. But immediately after your hearing, an ICE agent will be waiting outside of the courtroom to arrest you and put you into an expedited removal proceeding. This would be applicable to a category of people who've been here for less than 2 years. So it would apply more to the people who are granted TPS under the July, or where you had to be present by July of 2023. So a lot of people are very fearful of going to their court hearings, as well as kind of being in this legal limbo where they no longer have protection under TPS, and maybe they have a pending asylum application but don't know how to show that so that they can show that they have a right to be in the country. So it's a very precarious situation for a lot of people.
Sounds more than confusing, to say the least.
Yeah, sorry.
Nasreen, I'm sure you've heard plenty of concerns about the potential deportation as well, right? Are you able to give us some examples of what, I guess, some people are telling you, something that you've been hearing within your own community?
I think everybody just has so many questions. Like, she's an attorney and she's telling us how complicated it is, and her whole job is to navigate this and understand it. So people have so many questions, and there's a lot of fear, and like the fear of ICE coming and hunting people, and the fear of ICE on campus in the University of Minnesota actually working with ICE, which is making us want to discourage our community from attending the school because it's not safe anymore. It wasn't maybe safe before, but it's especially not safe now. So I feel like there is fear of deportation, but we are doing our best to keep the community calm, because putting them in a state of fear paralyzes them, and they need to be able to figure out how to build a life here still. And so we are doing our best as leaders in the community to keep the community calm and let them know that there are people who are fighting for them.
You put air quotes about leaders. Can I ask why?
I don't like the term. I just feel like we all bring a resource to a community, and we all specialize in different things, and so I'm not a fan of leaders.
We're comrades.
Comrades.
Is that
yeah,
a good word?
Comrades is a good word.
Well, and I would say too that it sort of takes away the individual agency of people. So my job, or like how I view my job as a lawyer, is that I help people make an informed decision. So like I can explain the law and sort of explain what your options are, but ultimately it's your choice how you want to proceed. Similarly, with a lot of the fear, I think empowering people with knowledge on what your rights are, what you can do if you're in a situation where you're stopped in the street by ICE, if ICE comes to your home, that's really important, because by empowering people with knowledge, they're able to take agency over their own lives, and it addresses that fear that you mentioned, because I'm seeing it in the Venezuelan community and all immigrant communities here in Minnesota, that fear paralyzes you. You're afraid to leave your house and take your kids to school, but by having that knowledge, it demystifies it and empowers people to be less afraid and understand that you have to continue your life.
So, I guess what are people telling you guys they're going to do right now? You know, like despite all of this change, like despite all of this fear that is mounting within the Afghan community and the Venezuelan community, what are people telling you they're going to do? I know that's a little vague.
I mean, do about what, I guess?
Like, are they going to stand fast? Are they going to just wait it out, see if they may avoid deportation? Are they looking on ways to just return, to avoid just
People
forcibly
are
exit?
trying to build their lives here. They're still continuing to try to build their lives here.
What does that look like despite changes to TPS?
A lot more anxiety. I think that there's this new tension that you can feel in the community, and a new level of fear that exists every time the community gets attacked, or anytime any community gets attacked, because we know when one community gets attacked, the next community gets attacked. Whatever they get away with in one community trickles down to the rest of us. And so we pay close attention to that and talk about that in our meetings. And it's very tense right now. And we've actually been requested by other community members in different organizations to continue organizing joyful events, so we can still come together and so we have solidarity amongst all of us and that we have joy still during this time.
What do these joyful events look like?
I think everything we do, I call a party. So it depends. Sometimes we have programs that have psychoeducation paired with it, or sometimes we have an Eid event, or we'll have a women's event, or I don't know. It usually includes some food and some dancing and some laughing and some henna and some kids running around. And yeah, it's pretty beautiful. People dress up and look beautiful, and everybody's glamorous. I'm so grateful that this glamorous community showed up in Minneapolis because we needed some glam.
I can see that. That sounds warm, I guess is the good word I want. I've got a question from Julie in the chat. Give me 1 second. Can I see this? All right, from Julie, she asks, do Afghans with green cards or approved asylum have reason to be fearful? No, if they have these, legal documents that say they're allowed to be here, should they still be cautious? I guess either of you can answer.
I would ask you to answer first, and then maybe I can give some.
So I would say that someone who either has asylum status or permanent residence, that is a much safer form of status, relative, sort of in the hierarchy of the forms of status that you can hold, in the respect that it is a permanent form of status that allows you to stay, live, work in the United States indefinitely. That said, there are some risks, particularly with regard to travel, as was mentioned previously. So anytime that you leave the United States and then you come back and come through customs, you're essentially like knocking on the door and applying for readmission to come in. So if there's any sort of issue in your background, you are potentially at risk of running into trouble when you come back in. So the advice that we're giving people, even if they hold permanent resident status or asylum status, is to be cautious about international travel. The other thing too is that if you have asylum status or refugee status, or if you were granted permanent residence or a green card based on a grant of asylum or refugee status, if you travel internationally, it's important that you apply for something called a refugee travel document, because by being granted asylum, effectively you're saying that you face harm or persecution from your home government. So you need a refugee travel document, because if you have a passport from the country that like you're seeking assistance, or a passport from the government that persecuted you, that could be grounds to revoke either your asylee or refugee status or permanent residence on that basis. So I just want to make sure I give that piece of advice to people listening.
I think the other thing too that is fearful is the idea that they have to have the original documents on them at all time, or it's illegal and they can get arrested for this. That's absolute madness. We've had people whose stuff has been stolen and it took months to get them back, and that was before all these cuts. And so it's illegal for them to even exist or travel outside of their home if they don't have their documents.
So what do they do in a situation like that, where they were stolen from?
We've had to try to we've had to try to find replacement documents for them. But this is new, right? This is a new.
Yes. Yeah. So so it's sort of two things. So technically speaking, on the books, there has been a law that if you have a work permit or you have permanent resident status, that you're required to carry those documents on your person at all times. It hasn't really been enforced as aggressively, but the bigger issue, and this kind of goes to the ramped up enforcement environment that we find ourselves in, is that the Department of Homeland Security, or the Trump administration, has expanded something called expedited removal, which allows them to do a fast-track deportation process of anybody who has been present for less than 2 years within the entire interior of the United States. Prior to January of this year, when expedited removal was expanded, it only applied to people who were apprehended within the 100-mile perimeter around the border zone, who had been here for less than 14 days. And because of the expansion of expedited removal, we're advising people to carry proof of their status on their person at all times, or at least proof that they've been physically present in the U.S. for 2 years, just to be safe, so that they're not swept up in this expedited removal process, because if you don't have proof that you've been here for at least 2 years or hold lawful status, then the system moves very, very quickly, and you could be swept up in this deportation machine before you even know what's happened.
Looks like I have another audience question from Zane, I believe is the name. They ask, is traveling safe for asylum seekers right now?
Domestically, well, I guess it depends. So domestic travel is probably fine as long as you have like a driver's license or a document that is Real ID compliant. That's another change that's happened, is Real ID is in effect when you travel on an airplane. International travel, I would not, do not travel internationally while your case is pending.
Okay. Oh, that gives you some clarification. You're fine if you're road tripping to California, for example.
Yes. Although carry your documents on your person in case you have a checkpoint or something.
We also had a second question. We had a second question also from Zane, or Zainab, my bad. Hold on. Sorry, give me 1 second. The wording on this one's a little bit. What do you mean? I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. For anyone just tuning in right now, thank you for joining us. My name is Alberto Villafan with Sahan Journal. We're experiencing a little technical difficulty over here. I'm here with Ana Potratz Acosta from Mitchell Hamlin Law and Nasreen Sajadi from the Afghan Cultural Society. We're talking about changes to humanitarian parole. I'm dyslexic. I never learned how to read. And how changes to humanitarian parole and how that impacts immigration and immigrants in Minnesota. Remember to keep asking us questions in the chat. More details are always welcome, by the way. That way I don't have to interpret what you're asking me. We're going to move on with one of the questions that I have while we sort this little bit out. Anna, are there any recent changes to humanitarian parole in the United States right now?
Oh, just a few.
Just a few?
Oh, God. I don't even know where to start. Okay.
Oh, God. Elephant in the room.
I feel like we need a couple hours for that question.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Couple glasses of wine to go with it.
Yes, please.
Yeah, please. Just like have it on tap. Anyway. Like, keep it coming. Anyway. Okay, so humanitarian parole. So just kind of like by way of background, humanitarian parole is an authority that is granted to the president and the executive branch that allows the president to admit people on a humanitarian basis. It's a form of status that has been granted, or an authority that's been used by every president dating back to, I believe, either the Truman administration or the Eisenhower administration. It was initially used to admit people who were fleeing post-war Europe and the communist countries during the Cold War, all the way up until recently with the Biden administration. Humanitarian parole historically, in addition to the evacuation out of Afghanistan, which there was a very large evacuation out of Vietnam after the end of the Vietnam War, where similarly approximately 80,000 people were evacuated from Vietnam after the fall of Saigon. They were all admitted to the United States with humanitarian parole. So I want to give that historical context so that people understand that this is an authority that has existed under the law going back 70 or 80 years, that's been used by every president, including President Trump. So going back to like more recent developments, as an immigration lawyer and someone who advocates for responsible immigration laws that benefit immigrant communities. I have plenty of criticisms of the Biden administration and how they handled immigration policy. But one thing that I will say to their credit is that they did introduce a number of lawful pathways for people to come to the United States on a humanitarian basis. And a lot of those lawful pathways were through humanitarian parole. So one of the programs was a program at the border where using a smartphone app called the CBP One app, where people could apply for an appointment and then they would be paroled in for 2 years at the border in order to pursue an asylum claim. So there were thousands of people that were paroled through CBP One. Number two, there were parole programs for nationals of particular countries. So the three main programs were for Afghan nationals, so people who were evacuated were all granted humanitarian parole. There was another program that was a little bit less successful in its administration, kind of putting it mildly, to sponsor people for humanitarian parole who were Afghan nationals after the evacuation. There also was a program, Uniting for Ukraine, where like a family member or a church or other organizations could sponsor somebody fleeing the war in Ukraine to come to the United States. I think tens of thousands of people were admitted through that program. And then finally, there was the CHNV parole program, which was for nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And under that parole program, a family member or a friend could sponsor you to come to the US and you would be granted humanitarian parole. So all of those humanitarian parole programs, the Afghan parole program, Uniting for Ukraine, CHNV parole, CBP One app, appointments and parole, those programs were all terminated. It was a day one policy of the Trump administration. And then for people who are present in the US with humanitarian parole, there's also been an effort to terminate grants of humanitarian parole for people who are already present in the United States. So for nationals of Afghanistan and Ukraine, after they were granted humanitarian parole, President Biden did allow them to apply for re-parole to get an additional 2 years of status. There have been some efforts to end that process, and I know that a lot of re-parole applications are currently stuck at USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the sub-agency of Department of Homeland Security that processes applications for relief. And then for CHNV parole, they actually tried to terminate it early, so you would lose your parole status, and then same for CBP One. And people received a very scary email saying your parole is terminated effective immediately, you need to depart the United States immediately or you will suffer grave consequences. And as you can imagine, getting an email like that is very, very scary for people. So we got a lot of panicked phone calls and texts after that went out. So thank you very much, Homeland Security.
Nasreen,
Put us in fear to paralyze us, right?
Right.
what's the benefit of having that confusion? Nasreen, having just received that wonderful info dump, I appreciate it. No, do not apologize.
That was a really good summary of everything. I was like, wow, you did it.
How do you keep people informed on what information they need to know? Like, how do you sift through, or how do you get people to understand what they need to know in this process right now?
We have a lot of conversations. My team is really amazing. So we discuss things very openly during our staff meeting. There's nothing that is too sensitive to share, honestly, with the team. And so we discuss amongst the team how we want to communicate things, what tone we want to communicate, what's the best way to communicate. And we have, we use our social media. We have a partnership with Sahan, and we have a newsletter, and we have a radio show as well with KFAI. And so we use all of these things to try to communicate anything we can so people know their rights, and not just the Know Your Rights campaign that we're pushing so people know what to do in case ICE stops them, but other information that they would need to know to keep themselves safe. And so we translate everything. We have it written, and then we also have people do voice recordings too, because some people can't read and write in their mother tongue.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know, we do our best, but it's a lot. It's a lot. We have a communications person, Gabe, who's amazing and does really great work for us to make sure our team knows, our community knows, is up to date on how to protect themselves.
This sounds like more than a lot. That's putting it lightly, if you ask me.
It's pretty exhausting. Like, like, you have to just navigate the legal part. That's like one portion. We have to navigate housing, healthcare, mental health, education, and then the interpersonal stuff that happens amongst families or community, and then trying to build an org and keep an org going. Like, we're tired.
Real quick before I get to an audience question, how long are your work days, I guess, for your staff and you?
My staff has a much more flexible life than I. So it depends. It depends on what service they're providing. The people who navigate social services, they tend to work all the time, on the lot, because they get a call, they have to go to the hospital in the middle of the night because there's no one available to translate, or they're afraid and they don't trust whoever's coming or whatever. So they'll call us. Or for me, it's like I work every day, all the time, day and night.
Work never ends.
It never ends. And I'm always talking about it. And I'm in love with Afghanistan and Afghan people. So I'm always talking about it. And so that just, it's not really work. It's my heart, you know?
All right. I've got 3 questions. The first one I'm going to ask is from Worthy Words. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. It sounds like you know who this person is.
Yeah.
First up, I'm going to ask from Worthy Words is, what's the difference between humanitarian parole and temporary protected status? Livana, that's for you.
Sure. So humanitarian parole is generally granted when you are coming into the country. So it's something that's granted, you either get approval of a petition or an application to be sponsored for humanitarian parole to come in, or you're granted humanitarian parole at the time that you're processed at the border or processed through customs. Temporary protected status, on the other hand, it is a form of status for people who are present in the United States as of the day that TPS is designated by the president or the Secretary of Homeland Security, technically. So it's, for many people, they may have been undocumented or have had their status expire, and then they're allowed to apply for TPS after it, as long as they're present on the day that TPS is designated.
Okay. Then regarding TPS, also from, I believe this question is also from Worthy Words. If I'm wrong, let me know in the chat. Could you also remind us on what is happening to TPS in Afghanistan and Venezuela? TPS to, give me 1 second. There's a lot of words in my head right now. Can you remind us what is happening with TPS regarding Afghans and Venezuelans in Minnesota? I got through it eventually.
Okay, so this is both in Minnesota and nationally. So there was actually a decision by the Supreme Court last week in the legal challenge challenging the termination of TPS for nationals of Venezuela, and this likely will have an impact on efforts to terminate TPS for other nationals of other countries, including Afghanistan. So the Supreme Court issued a ruling that reversed an injunction by a lower court and allowed the Trump administration to proceed with terminating TPS for nationals of Venezuela. And it's sort of the purpose of having those lower court injunctions is to ensure that there isn't harm to impacted members of the class or impacted members of the community that would be impacted by the lawsuit. So it was quite surprising, I would have to say, considering the strength of the legal challenge, particularly in the case of Venezuela, because you had sort of a concurrent analysis, because there was a redesignation of TPS for Venezuela that was one of the last acts of the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas before leaving office. And then Secretary Noem opted to reverse that decision, and then later terminate TPS. So you have a concurrent analysis of conditions on the ground. So there have also been like a lot of extemporaneous comments by Secretary Noem that show an animus toward nationals of Venezuela that made this legal challenge particularly strong, which was why the decision by the Supreme Court was quite surprising. But practically speaking, TPS is going to be allowed to be terminated, so people with TPS will lose their status.
Okay, I've got one more from the audience questions. This one is from Zainab. I called you Zain earlier, and I'm going to apologize for that. Your name is Zainab. You're asking, could you please explain if newborns in the U.S. are considered U.S. citizens at birth, even if parents are undocumented or are asylum seekers? I know we are constantly hearing new headlines about threats to birthright citizenship. That's still a thing, right?
Yes. So the Supreme Court will be hearing oral arguments on the executive order to amend the Constitution, which I'm just going to, no comment. But there is quite a bit of case law dating back to the Wong Kim Ark decision from 1892 that has found that children of immigrants are subject to the birthright citizenship clause. So the clause reads, any person born in the United States subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen. So to me, it's very clear. And the way that the law currently stands, any child born in the United States is a citizen at birth, full stop.
And can you remind me when we may be hearing, or when the Supreme Court will be hearing this case? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I think oral arguments have already taken place or will be taking place soon. I need to just look it up very quickly.
No worries. Thank you so much. Nasreen, regarding family, do you know any families who do have children that were born in the United States? But
yes, so many. There's so many new babies.
What are those families telling you?
I mean, there's been questions. The same question has been asked, like, what happens? What does this mean, especially about the birthright citizenship? But we don't have those answers. I don't know what those answers are, and we clearly are waiting still to see what will happen. But they're cute. They call them their American babies, or new Americans. Very cute.
New Americans? Yes,
Yeah.
Anna.
I would say one piece of advice to anyone who has a young child or a newborn who was born in the United States, apply for their passport as soon as you can. Because if the Department of State has recognized you're a citizen and granted you, or like issued a passport to you, you have a stronger claim that you are a citizen. So my advice is for everyone who has a young child, make an appointment and apply for a passport as soon as possible.
You can also do that by going online. Yeah, you can also do that by going online. If you're in Minnesota, you're able to reserve time to go to the passport centers. I usually go to the one in Roseville. Usually they're very speedy.
Yeah.
That's just my advice.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a passport center at the University of Minnesota. I know we've thrown shade at the U, but they do.
They be throwing shade at all of us right now.
Who knows? Well, yeah, I'm going to go work there next year, so I need to be very careful. So, but there is like a passport processing center on campus at the University of Minnesota, and I've taken my own kids there to apply for a passport, and it's very easy to make an appointment. So that's another option as well to apply for a passport.
Looks like we've got another question from Worthy Words. Are we able to take any actions to protect birthright citizenship at this point? Is there anything that we can do?
I don't know if there is. I think right now the question is before the Supreme Court, and it's one of those unfortunate things where it's somewhat out of our hands. The only thing I would recommend, as I said before, is if you are a citizen by virtue of being born in the United States, it's a very good idea to apply for a passport. So you have a current passport in hand.
Okay. I have a comment from Dana Day Lewis. I'm sure that's related to the wonderful actor. Seems like oral arguments happened May 15th in birthright citizenship case. Trump versus Casa. More information is available online. Thank you for adding that
Yeah, thank you.
information.
Yeah, I was just looking it up on my phone too. It's like, I think it happened. I'm not sure.
All right. I'm just going to remind everyone, if you are just now joining us, thank you so much for listening to our Sahan Live this afternoon. Again, we're here with Ana Patratz Acosta, a Mitchell Hamlin School of Law professor, and Nasreen Sajadi, the executive director of the Afghan Cultural Society. If you have questions for either of our wonderful panelists today regarding temporary protected status and humanitarian parole, please feel free to drop those into the chat. As you can see, we are trying our best to answer them to the best of all of our abilities. Anna, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
One challenging thing about following all this news, all this overflow of information about the current immigration situation is that migrants here may be trying to use different immigration statuses. I lost my train of thought. Could you walk me through real quickly like how humanitarian parole works?
Sure. So, as was mentioned before, and this is true of the more recent forms of humanitarian parole, usually you're granted humanitarian parole upon your entry into the United States. And under the recent programs, the way that you would be granted humanitarian parole would be usually through sponsorship from an organization or a family member or church, so on and so forth. And then you're allowed to come into the United States and you're granted humanitarian parole for a period of 2 years. Additionally, there was the CBP-1 app parole process where you were underwent initial processing at the border and then were paroled in for 2 years.
Okay. Thank you so much. I found my place on what I wanted to ask now. My bad. So when we were talking about deportations, what does this process typically look like?
Sure. So when a person is undergoing deportation, and the legal term is actually removal proceedings. So if you have been placed in removal proceedings, you are entitled to a full hearing before an immigration judge. And if you have any forms of relief that would allow you to stay in the United States, you can present an application for relief, be it asylum or if you're eligible for permanent resident status. You present that before the judge as a defense to your removal. And if the immigration judge, after hearing or reviewing the application and reviewing the evidence, hearing your testimony, grants you asylum, then you're allowed to stay in the country. If not, then you would receive a removal order. That process takes a lot of time. There's a lot of news about the historic backlogs in our immigration courts, but it is important in order to ensure that people receive procedural due process, that they have the right to undergo a hearing before a judge before they're removed.
Nasreen, do you help clients? Is client the right word?
It depends on who I'm talking to, but that's okay.
I'm going to use the word client just because it's easiest. I guess, how do you prepare clients for possible deportation hearings or immigration hearings at all?
We haven't had to deal with that, luckily, yet,
No?
at least in Minnesota. Not yet.
That's actually some pretty good relief.
Yeah, we are lucky. We've had pretty amazing attorneys support this community, volunteer. The Advocates for Human Rights did so much work for our community and continue to. So we're really lucky that they were so organized and people are like on top of their stuff here.
Can I ask what they did to help you guys?
They rallied all these immigration attorneys to volunteer their time to help fill out all this paperwork. And that was, I didn't see anything like that anywhere else in the country. Like, the response in Minnesota was so organized.
And this was through the
Advocates for Human Rights.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have another question from the chat. people are wondering, are we able to donate to the Afghan Cultural Society to help them with the new babies that get their passports ASAP?
Cute. Yes, you can. You can go to our website at afghanculturalsociety.org and you can donate there.
Great. Thank you so much. We're reaching the end of our broadcast. We've got about 10 minutes left in our conversation. And I kind of want to end it on a bit more of a positive note. What have you been doing? Like, what has the Afghan Cultural Society been hosting recently?
Well, we just had an Eid party a month ago or so, and we're about to have our next Eid party, and hopefully it will be in Powderhorn Park. We're waiting for the permit to be approved. But we're hoping to have kebabs on the water and music and dancing and just time to be in the sunshine and have joy together.
Are non-Afghan community members able to attend so that they can show support?
You can come volunteer with us. Sorry, the grant specifies that it has to be for Afghans. But you are welcome to volunteer with us or table if you'd like. If anyone wants to table to provide service to the community, you can email us at info@afghanculturalsociety.org.
Thank you. I've got another question from the chat from Zainab. Can ICE deport immigrants before their court hearings? Anna, I think that's for you.
So the short answer is yes or maybe. And that has to do with the expansion of expedited removal. So the law has been changed so that if a person has only been present for less than 2 years, they can be put in this fast track deportation process called expedited removal. However, a defense to expedited removal is if you have fear of persecution or fear of return in your home country, and you would be entitled to something called a credible fear interview. The other wrinkle in this has been the invocation of something called the Alien Enemies Act by President Trump or the Trump administration, and that was actually what was used to remove the 300 or so men, most of them being Venezuelan nationals, prominently Kilmar Abrego Garcia, to Sacat in El Salvador. They were all removed under the Alien Enemies Act. However, the Supreme Court has made very clear that prior to removal under the Alien Enemies Act, individuals are entitled to a habeas hearing where they would be able to assert that their life or their safety would be at risk if they were deported to another country.
Nasreen, I want to ask you, how is the Afghan Cultural Society supporting those who have been impacted by temporary protected status being terminated or that are facing these possible deportations?
Like I said earlier about advocates, we've been very lucky that everybody that we know of has applied for asylum in the state of Minnesota. And so now people are just in limbo waiting to hear back, ultimately. And there's this level of fear right now that if they're claiming that it's safe, will they still get asylum? Because now they're claiming that the conditions are good enough to go back to. Mm-hmm. So there is fear that they might get their asylum denied.
What advice do you have for people who are, being anxious, that are facing these fears right now?
I don't know. It's not my life. They teach me every day how to be resilient and keep moving and smile and have joy, and I take their lead.
What do you mean, take their
lead?
The
community's lead. It's they're the ones impacted. I'm just here to serve them, and so however they want me to lead and move is how I go.
I've got another question from the chat. This is from Kent Cycle. Apparently, Kent Cycle's girlfriend came into the United States from Nicaragua with humanitarian parole. If they were to get married, would she be able to adjust her status? I shouldn't have hit the mic.
Okay, so lawyer disclaimer that I don't want to give legal advice over this podcast or live stream. My advice would be to speak with an immigration lawyer about the specifics of the case. I will say that generally speaking, if a person has lawfully entered the country, either with a visa or parole parole. So the requirement under the law is you are admitted or paroled and inspected. That would allow you to go through the process of applying for permanent residence based on marriage or relationship to someone called an immediate relative inside of the United States. So generally speaking, there may be a path, but I don't want to give advice on a specific situation, and it's important that you consult with an immigration lawyer.
Okay. Kent Segal is telling me that they have spoken to an immigration lawyer. They have been advised, get married. Simple and short. I've got another question from, looks like Julie this time. Any word on people in refugee camps that are hoping to come to the U.S.? I assume we're talking about from Afghanistan?
I think everything is on hold right now.
Yeah. So I would agree. One of the other sort of day one policies of the Trump administration and President Trump was to suspend the refugee resettlement program. So refugees from Afghanistan and then from other countries around the world that have been waiting final approval of their refugee case, though it's on hold. And I anticipate the processing or admission under the refugee resettlement program is going to be on hold indefinitely.
Okay. So with the Trump administration ending TPS and threatening to end other humanitarian parole protections and programs, do people still have a legal pathway to citizenship right now?
It's very individual. So every case is different.
Mm-hmm.
However, particularly for nationals of Venezuela and Afghanistan, I would say most of them have a colorable asylum claim, and if they have not already done so, they would be best served by consulting with an immigration lawyer and evaluating whether or not they could apply for asylum as a way to stay in the country.
I've got one more question. Then we're going to have to wrap up our wonderful little show. I guess, in the first place, what does applying for asylum, what do applying for these processes look like? Are you guys able to walk me through this process real quick? Real quick is obviously not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are two ways to apply for asylum. If you have an active case in immigration court, you have to file your application with the immigration court. And then if you're not in removal proceedings, so that was the case for a lot of nationals of Afghanistan who came in after the evacuation with humanitarian parole, you apply affirmatively with USCIS. In both defensive asylum and affirmative asylum, what you need to do is file an application called the I-589 asylum application, and you provide biographic data as well as a brief summary of why you are afraid to return to your country of origin. Another thing that is a very important tip is that there is a rule that you have to apply for asylum within 1 year of arriving in the United States. There are some exceptions to that 1 year rule, but if you have been present in the United States for less than a year, it is very important that you file your asylum application within 1 year of arriving in the United States.
All right, we've reached the end of our broadcast. Nasreen, I'm going to give you one last chance. Is there anything you would like to add that we didn't get to ask you today?
I think I don't want people to forget the Afghan people, especially the situation that's happening with the women and the minority groups there. It is a really unsafe space, and if the U.S. is claiming that what is happening there is safe, the whole rest of the world should be afraid of what is to come.
Anna, is there anything you would like to leave with our listeners before we log off?
Well, especially since most of the information I provided has been very gloom and doom. So I've been an immigration lawyer for a little over 20 years, and I want to kind of leave with a message of hope or resilience. And what I have to say is that something that has always struck me about the immigrant community is that they're survivors and they're very resilient. And I feel discouraged and frustrated, especially right now with everything being thrown at us. But I look to my clients and look to the community to get strength, and that really is what keeps me going. And I think even though the immigrant community in the United States is under attack right now, they're a very resilient community, and it's important to embrace that resilience and joy and just continue to live your life, not live in fear.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for joining us. And thank you everyone for tuning into our broadcast today. One last thank you to our fantastic guests, Anna Potratska Costa, a Mitchell Hamlin School of Law professor, and Nasreen Sajadi, the executive director of the Afghan Cultural Society. We're going to have a recap article and video of our conversation available for you all later, in case you came in early, in case you came in late, or you want to find specific moments that you want to listen to again. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Alberto Villafan. You can always stay up to date with the latest news about immigration and other topics impacting immigrants and communities of color in Minnesota at sahanjournal.com. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Really? Can I see? Because a bunch of my friends posted this all over. And I was like, you guys are so cute.
No, actually, this is
Probably the most engaged I think we've ever been.
Yeah.
Wow. No, seriously.
Go
us. And you explain things so clearly.
Thank
So
you so
I know
much.
it's very
Jesus
complicated.
Christ.
Yeah.
Who asked that?
All of it.
Yeah, it was with Humanitarian Parole. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm
Look
talking
at
so much. I
Ash.
was like,
Ash
one
is
more thing.
really weird.
Yeah.
I know. How are things going now? I know it's kind of bombarded, but
It's yeah. Well, just like busy, and it's hard keeping up with everything because there's like a lot kind of coming at us all at once.
do what you can.
I think it'd be great to get like a standing picture.
Yeah.
Or like Alberto.
Hey. Alberto, Anna, Nazarene.
I feel like she was the star. She's the star.
Oh, you're both.
Whenever there's when there's an immigration attorney in the room, everybody's like,
You can answer so many questions.
Should we do it with the podcast in the back, or what do you think? Or should we do it like sitting? Or
I'm not sure.
let's just do it here.
Do you want the Sahan
Do you want to be?
behind?
I think
Yeah,
that'd be,
You want to do this one? Or this
Well-
other banner?
I think it'd be better with the sticks behind us.
Just sit and then turn.
Oh, we just lean against the tables or something.
Oh
I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
I'm
let's
not
do
good at
that.
posing.
No, that's good. That's good. Lean against the table or something.
Should I sit down or you want to just pull this set?
why don't you sit and we'll stand?
I feel weird sitting down, but okay.
But where are we standing?
Beside me, I guess?
Yeah,
I don't
this-
know.
yeah, you
This-
guys-
I feel weirdly.
Okay, why don't
Yeah, that was, I didn't want to say that.
Oh yeah, that's very. All right.
Hers is lovely, by the way. I'm so jealous.
Thank you. Just cut it. I turned
I-
40. I was
I
like,
just-
I'm going to do the things I want to do. I don't care anymore. I know.
Run out of Fs.
I've been hanging out with some 50-year-olds and they're like, wait till you get to 50. I'm like,
It
oh
gets
my
better?
God, I can't wait.
I turned 45.
So you're
Sorry, I'm
transitioning.
still getting my
Really
camera
not
setting.
I've always, all my friends who are like getting to 30 now are telling me like, oh yeah, it just gets better. Stop giving so much shit.
Why am I
The older you get, the better it is.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why people are so fearful.
Let me get closer.
Anything is better than lacking money right now.
This is the perfect fit. I was gonna say.
I think that's part of it. In your 40s, you have a little more stability and direction where you want to be.
All right, let's get one with standing too. Yeah.
Like this one. Yeah, it's sort of like.
I'm not, I'm not a professional. Your kids.
No, you're.
So hopefully these turn out, but
Something.
if you don't see the photos, probably. Oh wait, I think I adjusted the settings right, but no, it should be good.
Lens cap for this. Oh, hold on.
Oh, yeah, I have it.
Sorry.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
Are you only in Minnesota for the summer?
No.
I studied
It's here for school.
Wow. Where are you staying? Okay. It's just down the road. What are you saying? Thank you. We got swag.
Yes, you're gonna get swag. These are notebooks. There's my card.
Thank you.
There's our impact report. Your socks. There's
Socks.
Yes, you got some
You guys
swag.
got some good swag.
We're trying to do more
We're trying to do
too.
more swag.
And your contact?
Yeah, and my here, yeah. But just in case, or if you want to pass it along to somebody else.
No, I'll keep it.
But thank you so much. Thank you
Sorry
so
about
much.
that, Laura.
No, it's-
Huh?
I
barely
No, it's
noticed.
okay.
You're chilling. You're fine.
That's happened to me so many times.
Yeah,
Like,
it goes
it's
like that,
where I'm
and
not
you don't
supposed to
really
know.
know.
Yeah, and then you forget that.
Also, thank you.
Thank
What?
you.
For?
For
Hosting
hosting
and,
this
uh,
and bringing attention
yeah.
to what's
Oh, yeah, I did
happening to our
things.
communities.
Yeah.
Like, people are. It's hard, man.
Fucking
So the
confusing.
more allies we have, it's like so important.
I'm really happy with how many people actually like tuned in today, and I'm hoping that we reach the people that needed to know more information.
Was there a lot of people that were on the live?
Like, average of 20?
Yeah, which is pretty fine for such a small audience that we have, and for a live stream. For an
Yeah.
hour-long live stream, I only saw it
Like,
dip to like
consistently
19
having, like,
once or
20
twice.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
A lot of people typically hop in and out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've done
And
that
I'm
too,
curious
guys.
too, like with a replay or like once it's posted, if people
Yeah.
listen to it later.
Thanks.
I mean,
Yeah,
it'll
that's
be on our YouTube, and then clips will be on our Instagram, and then we'll have a story on the website.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys got lots of content, videos, pictures, like.
Try our
We
best.
try.
Yeah, you did
We're
great.
trying to take as much
We
advantage
need
of
more
this.
media people.
Contact
It's
us if you need help.
important. Yeah.
It
It
is.
documents the story, the history.
Well, if
Thank you.
anyone-
Nice
anything else
meeting you.
It was wonderful meeting you. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Anybody want anything to go for the road?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for calling you.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
It's wonderful meeting you.
There you go.